The information provided in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice.
Hey, it's Nikki. Thrilled to hand the mic over to our friends at TestRx MD. You might remember David and me sharing our pretty in-depth health journey last year, from a devastating diagnosis to our taking health by the driver's seat. We chose to partner A to B first with the health professionals that have helped us most. Collectively, David and I, we lost over 60 pounds, and so many other aspects of our health have us feeling more lively and confident these days. So look, we're on a learning journey with you, and we know you agree. Health is so crucial to our ability to live our best lives. P.S. Don't wait to hit this team up at TestRx MD for a free concierge coaching call. There's a link in the show notes, or feel free to ask us. But this action could be the start of a whole new you. It was for us. So I'm passing the mic to our partners at TestRx MD.
Hey guys, welcome back to Activate Your Best Health. Today we're joined by Dr. Saddoris, and we're going over an incredibly important topic today. Topic that surrounds weight loss and basically methodologies in today's healthcare landscape to be advantageous to you for helping you in your weight loss journey. There are many myths and there are many tips and tricks to optimize this GLP-1 therapy. So we're going to dig right into that. And first, we're going to get into Dr. Saddoris' background so you guys can see exactly why she's so qualified and why she's been called to this work. So right off the bat, Dr. Saddoris, I'd love to start by having you briefly introduce yourself. What drew you to this work, and especially your clinical interest in these GLP-1 compounds and metabolic medicine as a whole?
Yes, I've been an internal medicine specialist for over 30 years. And then I probably, about 6 or 7 years ago, I became a lipid specialist. And understanding how glucose metabolism and lipids are so interactive and how they affect the development of cardiovascular diseases such as heart attacks and strokes, and then poor circulation, kidney problems, things like that, fatty liver, all of those effects are all interacting. And so when I started studying about that, I realized that we were treating diabetes, but more importantly, we say diabetes is a certain level, but the reality is that we're having damage happening sometimes 15 to 20 years, even before it's ever diagnosed. And so understanding that these underlying metabolic problems continue to get worse and they create more issues as we do not treat it. So I've always felt that the GLP-1 should be first-line treatment. Of course, unfortunately, insurance dictates that, we're not going to let you be on it unless you have certain criteria. But by then, you've lost over 50% of your pancreas function, have already developing fatty liver, and already have started neurodegenerative changes in your brain related to these glucose metabolites and also the inflammatory markers that they're creating. And so it's so important that, we have to treat people as individuals. And it takes probably 20 years for insurance to get on board, only because they want to wait till it becomes generic and becomes readily available and be a lot cheaper. In the meantime, your health is being detrimentally affected and may not ever potentially return back to its normal state and have to deal with damage that has happened that was not treated in the appropriate times. So I'm very much into, longevity, doing lots of studies on that, cellular health, cellular function, metabolic signaling, and all of those are related to how our cells interact with each other and what causes disease and why and how we can avoid them.
Let's set the stage here. So why is there such a surge of interest? I'm sure so many people have heard about Mounjaro or Ozempic and all of these GLP-1 compounds. Why is there such a surge recently? And what's the biggest misconception about this category of drugs that you see in the market today?
Well, I think the surge comes from people are finally finding a solution to a problem that just never got better. When you have insulin resistance, you just do not lose weight, right? You might lose a few pounds, but then it's all back and more because you're not correcting the underlying metabolic problems that are causing it. And so when people started seeing, I'm getting weight loss, I'm having some control, they spread it like wildfire. And some of the misconceptions are is they want rapid weight loss. You've got this weight on, and it took you 20, 30 years on to get it there. To expect it to be all gone in 6 months is going to be causing some major metabolic changes that your body hasn't had a chance to adapt to, mainly your muscles, your soft tissues, your connective tissue, and that's where you get this very laxity of skin and things like that, because you're trying to lose weight too rapidly and you're not allowing the natural processes to correct and heal itself, not just the weight, but all the other things it has created in your body. And so that's the misconception. We want it off now, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And when we expect that, we're going to create some major, major complications and problems.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to add a couple things to that actually too. A couple other pieces here are people seem to like to use these. I mean, we see this in the clinic all the time where people like to use these as the magic pill or the magic injection, that they just think, okay, well, we can do this once weekly injection and magically all this stuff comes off, but they're not addressing the gut issues. They're not, like, if they have an inflamed gut, that's another reason that the weight can come back when they stop. And not only that, they're not addressing the lifestyle issues. So now you're taking this compound, cool, you're losing some weight, you're going to build tolerance. You got to keep going up and up and up in dose. You get to the ceiling dose, it's not working anymore. Now you got to go to a stronger one or add another compound. And before you know it, you're on all of these things that have potential side effects. And then you have to stop it at some point. You're not going to take it the rest of your life. What's going to happen if you haven't started to try to get into the gym and you haven't tried to do resistance training? You haven't tried to alter your diet. We'll kind of get into some of these things in this talk, but these are very, very important things. You got to alter that lifestyle. What you were doing before you got on these compounds got you to the place that you are today. So how do you think that not changing that is going to lead to anything different than where you're at now?
Definitely. And a lot of times when you lose a lot of weight, especially on these products, you lose muscle, and muscle is what burns calories. And so sometimes you gain all your weight back and then some. But there are strategies that we can do to help prevent that from happening. And the philosophy about getting off of these products, I think this is changing. I think the microdosing of these semaglutide type products at low doses that just kind of slightly raise your GLP-1 can kind of keep things under control once you got a lot of the weight off. So I'm not into the philosophy of stopping. I'm in the philosophy of going to the lowest dose, the lowest frequency. Sometimes we can go like every 2 or 3 weeks or even a couple months. A small dose can hold you over once your weight problem. And as long as you're continuing to realize that, people say lifestyle changes, but I think the first change needs to be, how do we view food? Are we eating to fullness? Never have that happen, because what happens is you've lost the sensation of fullness. And so that's why you overate in the first place. So we stop eating when we're no longer hungry. We start looking at food of what we need for our cells to function best. I don't need sugar. I don't need high fructose corn syrup, in our drinks that are very harmful to us. What I do need, though, is complex carbohydrates in moderation, and protein. Lean proteins are very helpful, and lots of green leafy type vegetables, which add fiber and help with digestion. The other is just evaluating, like you mentioned, the gut. We're finding out that leaky gut is causing diabetes, cardiovascular disease, strokes, actually dementia, increased risk of cancers. It has a whole slew of problems. And there are some tests that can be checked. You can do either a stool or a serum zonulin test. A lot of your doctors are not even familiar with that test. But that is so critical to see, do I have a leaky gut? Because if that is present, you do have it, and it needs to be treated. And there is a process of healing this intestinal barrier, because what leaky gut is that inflammation is caused there. And there's these tight junctions in the cell membranes, and they get opened up from inflammation, and they allow the bacteria, the cell membranes, to get into the bloodstream. And this causes severe inflammation, and inflammation triggers blood clots, it triggers scarring, it increases atherosclerosis. It affects how our immune system works. It just has so many negative effects. And here you're not even aware that this is happening because you're not necessarily having gut symptoms. It's from all the leaking that's going into the bloodstream that should be kept in the gut and not into the intestine, into the rest of your body. So this is something I think most people need to be checked and maybe be monitored. If you have it, you've been treated, maybe, recheck to see if that zonulin level is back to normal. And, maybe we should consider this to be a yearly test, like we do a yearly test for blood sugar, a yearly zonulin test to see if something has changed on you. And if it has, then we get it corrected early before it's created a lot of problems for you.
Yeah, I love the fact that you brought up the microdosing too, because we'll kind of get into that. I guess I should have clarified for therapeutic doses versus maintenance doses, because that's super important. And I think it also comes down to, what model are you trying to get your healthcare done through? Are you trying to get inside that insurance model? Or are you trying to actually have the highest and best possible care and going either concierge or going cash pay or, having this other route? Because we all know that going the insurance model, you think they're going to cover that zonulin test? You think they're going to cover all of these other ancillary therapies that are really breaking through right now that are showing so much promise? But is insurance going to really pay for that? Probably not. So let's get into the mechanism of action here. So let's break this down. So we're going to kind of get into each one, semaglutide, tirzepatide, and then even the new kid on the block, retatrutide, that hasn't even officially launched yet, which is really promising and pretty incredible. And we can kind of get into your experience with that compound specifically and kind of what you have to say there. But let's start with semaglutide. So can you explain how semaglutide works mechanistically and what is a GLP-1? How does that work? And explain that to us in layman terms.
Yeah, so they discovered this one peptide in our intestines, and they called it, for GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide. And the reason why they said that is that it reduced the release of glucagon, especially from the liver. One of the mechanisms that goes wrong when we have insulin resistance is that our body normally has glucagon available if our blood sugars drop. But when you have the cellular signaling that's messed up, your body, even if you ate sugar, it will release even more sugar out into the bloodstream, so it spikes you even higher. And this creates this insulin resistance because it turns all of this food into belly fat. And the more belly fat you get, the more resistance. But we also have resistance in the muscles. They no longer are absorbing the insulin that you need for energy. And so again, it's all being thrown back into the liver and into your abdominal area. And it gets into a vicious cycle. And until we can try to control this massive release of insulin that you get from GLP-1 stimulation and the glucagon causing it to be released into your bloodstream, and then you have this increase in appetite because you release a lot of insulin, it makes you hungry, and then you eat more, and it gets into more and more cycling. So as interesting as it is on a GLP-1, it does cause insulin release, but it causes it release appropriately in response to what you eat, rather than being released constantly in your system that has been messed up because your insulin resistance. Because what that means is that you have a whole lot of insulin circulating in your bloodstream all the time because it's not being taken up by your muscles and it's not being metabolized correctly. And so it's in this high hunger state, basically, is what it's putting you in. And that's why you're wanting to eat all the time. And that's why sugar cravings and all of those things is because this insulin is so elevated. So some of the things that we can do naturally is that a lot of people do not get proper sleep. They need 8 hours. If they're not, they get elevated cortisol, which is a hormone that raises your blood sugars, right? So it's a stress hormone. So you're in a constant state of stress, your body. And so you need to get adequate sleep. And we need to also be conscious that when we're in this abnormal metabolic state, we're producing these abnormal products. reforming what's something that's called DGAGs, which are diacyl triglycerides, which basically block the effects of insulin on the muscle, and it just worsens insulin resistance. And so in order to get rid of these metabolic byproducts, we need a period of time of not eating so our system has ability to clear. And that's why it's so important we do 12-hour fasting every day. I typically stop eating around 5:30 and then eat my first meal around 5:30, 6 o'clock the next day. I drink water is fine. If I just feel absolutely hungry, I may eat a can of green beans, but I really struggle not to try to eat anything if I can. So it allows my system to get rid of all of these unnatural products that have accumulated from the food that I've ingested. And this is a principle that you need to carry for the rest of your life. This is not something we're doing for weight loss. We're doing this for health, right? So we need to stop seeing things as trying to lose weight as we are trying to change our health and our quality of our life so that we're not going to have dementia. We're not going to have diabetes. We're not going to have cancers. We're not going to have the fatigue and low energy states that all of these create. And that's why it's so important that we address that. But the GLP-1 releases insulin appropriately to food. It does block that glucagon secretion somewhat. It also slows the emptying of your stomach. So therefore, it decreases your appetite. It also, if you don't understand that you need to control fat in your diet, because fat slows the emptying of your stomach as well, and then you can get intense nausea. A lot of people eat their same type of foods they were eating before. I said, I'm so nauseous, I'm so vomiting, I'm so miserable, I don't want to take it anymore. And I'm telling them, one, you can't eat the same amount you ate before. You need to cut your portions down. Don't drink a lot of fluid, a half an hour before you eat, or even, within an hour after eating, because again, that slows gastric emptying even further. And then making sure it's low fat, because that also slows the emptying. If you do those simple things, the nausea does much, much better, or not even have it at all. And sometimes taking a Pepsid will also help. Sometimes with the slow emptying, you might get some reflux, and so taking a Pepsid would help if you have any indigestion. But those are things that you would need with any of those three products that simple thing like that can make a big difference in how you can tolerate, but also be very effective for you.
That's kind of one of the, semaglutide is one of the earlier generation GLP-1s. So we'll kind of move forward into the next generation. And this is one that I'm sure so many of the listeners out there have heard of. This one made major waves. It's an Eli Lilly product, and it's called tirzepatide. Brand name is Mounjaro. So tirzepatide adds in something else besides the GLP-1 called GIP. And the interesting thing here is each one of these compounds by themselves, they actually would appear to work contradictory to each other. But when you add them together, they're synergistic. And so I guess, can you get into what adding that GIP really does and how that impacts efficacy or even the side effect side of things?
Yeah, it's kind of like when you add 2 + 2, instead of being 4, it becomes 8. Okay, because you're working on different mechanisms. So they have sometimes similar effects, but they're working on different receptors. And this is also a gut hormone, okay, and a peptide rather. And so they're meant to be worked together. So the GIP is called glucose-dependent insulin-tropic peptide. Essentially what it means is that it's responding into what you're eating, glucose-dependent what you're eating. So it does increase insulin release when you're eating, and it lowers your blood sugars, okay, because elevated blood sugars is what's triggering all of this fat accumulation. And it lowers it by helping it get into the muscle where it needs to be broken down and be utilized. It also slows gastric emptying, so it has a dual effect, but in different mechanism. So it makes you feel less hungry. And there's even some question that it might be even having some effect on the hypothalamus, which is the part of the brain that regulates your hormones. that may even slow down appetite and increase satiety. So it, again, synergistically works with each other. And so that's why it's more powerful together than independently one or the other effects. So, the Mounjaro, or it's known as Zepbound if you want to use it for weight loss, has been a big jump in terms of improvement, in terms of effect. For some people who didn't respond that well to the Ozempic had found a great response with this. But I think, again, remember, it doesn't change how you approach your food. You still need the fasting. You still need the low, reduced carbohydrate, make them complex rather than simple sugars, and avoiding those high-fat foods and eating a lot of protein, because you lose protein on these products, okay? And one way, as you mentioned before, is resistant training. Lifting weights will help improve that, but you still need the protein to build muscle, okay? And so I always tell people at least 2 of your meals you should eat protein first. So if you get full, or if you feel like, that sensation of fullness, stop. And then make one of your meals where you would start with your carbohydrates first and your complex carbs, and then do the protein last. So that way you make sure you get the most important nutrient in your system.
Nice. Well, thank you for that. So now we're going to get into the new kid on the block, retatrutide. So this hasn't officially been released yet. I know that there are ways to access this compound through different sources, but this is a pretty incredible one, because not only does it have, this is the newest generation, by the way, not only does it have the GLP-1, it has the GIP, but now they're also working on that glucagon receptor. And it's a glucagon receptor agonist, which you spoke on before. GLP-1 can, or semaglutide specifically, can slightly affect that, but now they're really ramping that aspect up. So what do we know so far, and your personal experience with it as well? And everything you've seen in personal use.
Yeah, so they call that GCG now for the glucagon receptor agonist. The big thing is it's affecting that liver, okay? It's blocking that glucagon release of sugar into the bloodstream. And what they're finding is that a lot of people have these deposits of, they call it fatty liver, but it's actually metabolic byproducts that have built up into the liver, and it's caused a type of hepatitis and inflammation. They now call it metabolic steatohepatitis. They used to call it fatty liver, or non-alcoholic liver disease was another term for it. That affects the function of how you actually metabolize all kinds of things in your body, because your liver is a clearinghouse, right? And so it's been shown to help lower those fat deposits. It's found to reduce that inflammatory response that's occurring in the liver. And so a lot of GI doctors now are actually doing that as a treatment to help that fatty deposits that are occurring and creating issues metabolically in their system. So these combinations, we're discovering them, but they've been around, okay? They've just been suppressed by the way that we eat. They've been maybe affected by the leaky gut syndrome that we've developed. And so there's a whole slew of other compounds that are out there that, again, they work in synergism because they were meant to be that way. They are our natural products that have been reduced by our diet, by the inflammatory process in our gut, by our lifestyle changes that have created this problem, and now we're trying to correct it, okay? And so I think the one part that we're really starting to realize, and I was just so impressed, because, Medicare really doesn't want to pay for things at all, but they have a study out showing that people that have had cardiovascular events, that could be stroke or heart attack, that when they put them on semaglutide, they had a 20% reduction in cardiovascular events and a 28% reduction in heart attacks. And they now are FDA approved to be prescribed if you have those conditions, which is like amazing that they even did that, okay? A side note, I wish they would include it for chronic kidney disease, but they found dramatic reductions in worsening renal disease and chronic kidney disease. It helps slow down the damage to the kidneys happening, improved blood flow through the kidneys, so it improves circulation and improved filtration of getting rid of abnormal compounds that are in your system. And so I'm hoping that they will be getting that for people that have chronic kidney disease, because that might save a whole lot of people being on dialysis, okay? So, yes, I think we're finding, as I initially felt when I was studying lipids, that the GLP-1 and that whole family of peptides have major improvements in our life. And these problems occur long before we can ever pick up an issue. I always felt this should be our first line of treatment. It should be given very early. If you're even about, 10, 20 pounds overweight, you should be considering treatment with this, okay? I know when I was doing the lipid assessments, I actually put myself on semaglutide because I just felt so strongly about it. I had lost probably about 40 pounds on it and had essentially have kept that off for about 8 years now. And so it is so critical that we treat the underlying metabolic problems rather than just trying to cosmetically make you look better. Let's go ahead and have a tummy tuck. Let's go ahead and have this removed. Let's have that removed. Yes, cosmetically you look better, but your metabolic problems are still existing and they're still occurring and they're still creating havoc in your system. And we just need to start looking at things that way and not be tied by what insurance will accept and not accept, because they are not having to live with your complications and problems. Their focus is saving money for themselves at the risk of your own health. And you're paying a bundle of money for your insurance. We need to stop looking at treating diseases and we need to start looking at preventing diseases. And I think that idea of changing the way we are will make us healthier, and healthcare costs will dramatically lower automatically because our health is improving.
Yeah. And I love what you said there at the end. So it's kind of like the next iteration of healthcare per se. So, this system that I think we're kind of exiting or on the brink of exiting is kind of like healthcare 2.0. And that system was to optimize lifespan. So how can we get you to live longer, but not necessarily in a healthier manner? So yeah, we're getting you to live longer, but you're strung out on all these compounds and all these drugs so that they can be profited on by big pharma, right? Whereas this next iteration is optimizing health span. So yeah, you're going to live longer, but you're going to get 7, potentially 10 years of healthy living added to your life versus just, being on the couch all day long, attached to machines or all these compounds you got to take. So I think that's a nice little iteration that's kind of in the process of happening with all of these new compounds, which is super, super exciting. So now let's kind of get into this next little segment here. And this is about the myth busting aspect. So unrealistic expectations. Let's kind of set the tone for what can you realistically expect and how should you go about things in a healthy manner to lose this weight? So one of the biggest myths that, I see all the time on social media is I should be losing 10 to 15 pounds per week on semaglutide or fill in the blank, pick any GLP-1. Can you explain why that's not only false, but truly harmful?
Definitely. Like I mentioned earlier, is that our body has to adapt and change as we start improving. And cellular structures, especially our skin, our connective tissue, which involves even our blood vessels, basically all of our skeletal parts of our body, muscles, they need time to start functioning right. They need starting to shrink back normally so that you don't get this super loose skin issues and have to undergo major plastic surgery for these problems. And by doing more gradual weight loss, it's more sustainable. What's rapidly off is rapidly gained back. And you're learning during this time of how do we start seeing food differently, how we start looking at portion sizes, how we're making better choices. doing our 12-hour fast and becoming quite used to doing it, and it's natural and you don't even think about it. You just do it. It becomes part of your lifestyle. The exercising and the strengthening that you need to happen to help those muscles now become more insulin sensitive. We don't want to develop low blood sugar reactions, which can have problems with, your brain when your sugars get too low. You can get damage to the neurons in our brain by having multiple low sugar reactions. So we want it to be in a healthy, slower process that will get us there and stay there. I'm happy with a 2-pound month weight loss. I know people really want to be much more rapid, and it's acceptable to have 4-pound weight loss. But when I start getting more than that, I start thinking maybe we need to cut the dose down, okay? Or maybe I need to increase the interval, especially if they're having like a lot of nausea. So instead of every week, maybe I'll do it every 10 days. Or we find a thing that works best for that person. So everything needs to be individualized. There is no one set way for every person. They have this titration schedule. I don't really follow it. Like, hey, after 1 month, you bump up here. Another month, you bump up here. Or 2 months, whatnot. I go by what you are doing, how it's affecting you. If it's responding and working, the lowest dose that works is the dose you want to be on, right? Because what happens in our body is that we develop something that's called homeostasis. When we take too much of something, our body adapts to it, and then to get the same effect, you have to take more and more and more to get the same benefit. But if you keep the dose low, you're not stimulating that homeostasis because it's not way out of control. And you're allowing other things like getting proper sleep and the fasting and the exercise and the appetite, changing the quality of the types of food that you're eating. Allowing those to work synergistically with the medication will give you much better long-term benefits and sustainable results for you. And so we all can do a cookbook, right? Do this, do that, do this, do that. But, are you the same as your neighbor? We're different. And so we need to adjust accordingly.
I love how you said that. So we'll kind of move into those titration schedules a little bit for you guys. So traditionally, when these GLPs first came out, they are very aggressive with the therapeutic titration schedules. I mean, you would have your first step, which we'll kind of get into on what that is for each compound. But it seemed like every couple of weeks, you would double that dose and then continue to double. So, for example, on semaglutide, let's just say, you would start out at 0.25 milligrams. And depending on how you dilute and the concentration and all that, that's going to vary what you actually are drawing up in a syringe. But in terms of actual medication, 0.25 milligrams. Then after 2 weeks or so, you'd go up to 0.5. And then you'd go to 1. And then you'd go to 2. And then that ceiling dose is 2.4. So you never want to go above that. And we have seen so many people at the clinic where they go to this provider somewhere else and they are literally prescribing them 5 milligrams a week of semaglutide and then wondering what's going on. Why are there these side effects? Why are all these things happening? Well, you doubled the ceiling dose of what is therapeutically effective. So there's going to be some ramifications of doing that. And that's why our approach of less is more, figuring out the better dose for you specifically with lifestyle and all these other factors taken into account is the better approach. So traditionally, now this is not a set in stone thing, but something that Dr. Saddoris and I normally see patients going with is you go and you stay at a dose for a month and then you assess how you're doing. And if you need to adjust, you adjust. But that is done on an individual basis. And instead of going up every 2 weeks and doubling and doubling and doubling, we only would go up in that 0.25 increment. So even as you get higher, you're not ever doubling the dose outside of the first step, but you're really fine tuning that with much more granularity. Now, when it comes to like Mounjaro, the same thing. You would start at 2.5 milligrams, and then that can get up to 15 as that ceiling, and you go up in increments of 2.5. Retatrutide, it's something similar as the semaglutide dosing. So it's 0.5 and you do something similar there. But the name of the game, as Dr. Saddoris has already said, is low and slow. And that will get you there just as well as going quickly, but without the reduction of the possibility of gaining the weight back. You're going to be able to keep the weight off longer because you're going to have made the lifestyle changes and you're going to be much happier in the long run. So we try to go for what's going to help you the most in terms of long-term health. Because if you lose 50 pounds or 60 pounds in 2 months, what do you think is going to happen to your body? It's going to freak out. We've had patients that actually have done that and they have gotten extremely ill. I mean, they literally had to go to the ICU because they lost so much weight so quickly. And why would you want to go through that? That's not something that you want to go through. So trust us, we're the experts here. Low and slow is the name of the game.
I do want to add to that, John, is that people think that, increasing your dose, that you're going to get double the effect that you had at the lower. And the reality is you only just get a little bit more, okay? And once you get to the maximum dose, the reason why there was a maximum dose is they found there wasn't any more effectiveness at a higher dose, but side effects were dramatically increased. And so we would really like to try to avoid maximum doses if we can, okay? Because we want to be able to correct some of these other things. And a lot of it is, let's get our stress levels down, get our cortisol that's just ramping us up and raising our sugars. We need to find ways to reduce stress. We're in a society that wants go, 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 instant results, this, that, and the other. And we're just in this constant state of push. And that just is so harmful to our body. We need to have states of relaxation. And I don't mean watching TV and eating potato chips on the couch. I'm talking about your mind being relaxed, okay? Because it never gets relaxed. It's always processing. And the only time you can really relax is, sometimes go out in nature and just look at the trees and just look at the birds and the bugs around you and just be at peace with what's there. Accepting things in your life, not be worrying about them. It's a meditation of all is well with me, right? And if you get your mind well, your body's going to follow suit as well.
Yeah, that's huge. That mind-body connection is massive. So I would highly encourage people to do some sort of meditative practice, whether it's just going out in nature and like Dr. Saddoris said, and kind of looking around, looking at the trees, the birds, the animals, and all that, or it's dedicated, 5-10 minutes or longer, depending on who the person is, of just sitting quietly with yourself. That's the name of the game, though, is the solitude aspect. You have to be with your own thoughts so that you can then have a clear mind and relax. If you're constantly being stimulated right, left, and all that, not only are you not able to do that, but you're spiking cortisol. The name of the game is controlling the cortisol. And that's why when you sleep, you're getting rid of a lot of the cortisol, and that's the name of the game. So figuring out how to deal with the cortisol spikes and do that in a manner that allows you to function much more effectively. So that's huge. Now, another thing here, that I really want to address is, a patient starts losing weight in the beginning at a certain dose, and then they hit that plateau. It's going to happen to everyone that's trying to lose weight, right? Now, magically, what do you guys think that the answer is? Well, in your mind, you probably think, well, up the dose, right? I mean, ultimately, you want to up the dose right away. Now, how do we get across to the listeners here what's happening physiologically during the stalls, and why is it not just that knee-jerk reaction of, let's just raise the dose?
When you hit the plateau, the reason why is your cells are needing to recover from the changes, okay? There's cellular turnover that's happening. There's cellular death that's happening. We need to have the muscle cells that were not responding to insulin to die, so new muscle grows, okay, that will respond to insulin appropriately. So all muscle loss is not bad. It's just that we want the appropriate muscle loss, the ones that don't respond to insulin, the ones that have insulin resistance. And in order to get that, that's where you need the weightlifting and keeping those carbs down and stress down so they're responding appropriately. But the plateau is just allowing the body to reset, giving your body a reset. My weight was used to be at 200. Now it's at 180. I'm resetting now to a new weight of 180 is normal for me. And as you stay there for a little bit, you still need to exercise. And sometimes you need to up your exercise in order to restart the reset again, right? Reassess your diet. Am I slipping in more carbs now? Am I eating a little bit more fat? How can I maximize weight loss? I find if I exercise, you need to exercise if you do aerobically, a minimum of 30 minutes, because that's when you start switching from glucose metabolism to fat metabolism in about 20-25 minutes in your exercise. So if you only go to 30 minutes, you're only getting 5, maybe at the most 10 minutes of fat burning. If you go to 45 minutes, you're throwing in an extra 15 minutes. So actually, ideally, is a 45 minutes. Once you're done exercising, the best thing to do at that time is when you should eat. Okay, get your protein in and maybe a little bit of complex carbohydrate, because your metabolism is revved up at that time and you can handle those things, extra calories, a little bit better and eliminate them. But it also, you need them to get to rebuild your muscle to new muscle and to help eliminate some of the compounds that are causing trouble in your system. So these resets are actually for your benefit. And you push through with exercise. You still stay on your GLP-1. The natural GLP-1s are out there, like berberine also can increase GLP-1. But just simply resting helps raise it too, And then if we're still struggling, maybe a slight little boost once and then kind of get things going and then maybe even drop back down to your previous dose. And see how you're doing. Sometimes it's kind of like a car. It takes a lot of effort to start pushing it down the hill, but once it starts moving down the hill, the momentum keeps it going. So sometimes we might just periodically spike it a little bit and then back down and then allow that to continue on as we continue with our exercise and everything else that we're doing. So it's not just a knee-jerk, let's up the dose. We need to reevaluate our diet. Are we doing the fastings? Are we keeping those carbs down, especially the simple sugars? I mean, fruit juice is horrible. You're better to eat the whole fruit. Some people, I juice my own. It's still the same problem, okay, because you eliminated the fiber, that slows the absorption of the sugar. So we need to be aware that, limiting fruit, maybe to a half a cup a day during this process of weight loss. Once we get to the point, we've got the fat off and things, we can increase that somewhat as long as we still maintain, It's always a balancing of what's going on in our lives and how we can optimize that balance to give us the best results. And that's not a cookbook. You're different, and our metabolisms are different, and we have to recognize that.
Yeah, and I really want to add one piece to what you just said, too. So a huge piece here is the amount of lean muscle mass that you have in your body is directly correlated with your resting metabolic rate. So if you're able to increase the amount of lean muscle mass that you have, now you can burn more calories, even just sitting on the couch. Granted, you're going to hopefully be active and you're going to be burning more as you do other activities. But if you can increase that muscle mass, now you're going to be able to lose weight more effectively. Now, the vice versa is also true. So if you get onto these GLP-1s and you're not doing any sort of resistance training, and yeah, you're losing weight, but you're losing muscle mass, what do you think happens to your resting metabolic rate? All right, that's something to consider. Now, there are strategies that we can employ to add other things into the GLP-1 therapy to allow you to be more effective at synthesizing muscle to increase that rate. And we do this all the time. So that's one way. Now, the biggest thing here is make sure that you are doing that resistance training so that your muscle mass doesn't fall off a cliff, because then it just gets that much harder to lose the weight ultimately. If you go from being able to burn, 600 calories, this is just a random number, 600 calories just, every day going to work and all that at a resting rate, and all of a sudden that drops to 300, what do you think is going to be happening in your weight loss journey. You're probably not going to be as effective. And that can also be another reason for plateaus. Because if you're losing that muscle mass, now it's that much harder for you to lose weight. And as Dr. Saddoris said, you got to increase what you're doing in the gym, because then you got to increase your expenditure or increase that muscle mass. So that's something that, there's a little nuance there. And again, as Dr. Saddoris had said, everybody's individualized. Everybody is different. And that's the true misnomer today in social media. It's the magic pill or the magic injection that's going to get you to lose weight. No, it's much more nuanced and much more intricate than just that. I do want to add one more piece. So another tip and trick here to think about. So, some people, as Dr. Saddoris has already said, they've talked about nausea and they've talked about, constipation or fatigue after certain doses. So what's a good strategy here? Is there an advantageous time of day to take these compounds? Is it imperative to make sure that you're dosing at the same time, at least every day? Shed some light here. And what's the optimal way of going about this?
Yeah, I mean, these are long-acting products, so optimal times isn't so much important as it is maintaining around the same time and the same day every week. So if you do it on Mondays and at 8 o'clock, you want to keep it at Monday at 8 o'clock as best you can. It's just that's when you're going to maintain a steady state. We have periods of even 24 hours change, those levels drop, and so you're not sustaining the main level, so you never get to a steady state. And that's why you can get fluctuation. For those who have a lot of nausea, and you've tried reducing the water and cutting back the fat, but nausea is a sign to me that you're overeating, and so sometimes you just really need to cut your portions down significantly. But sometimes people will notice that maybe after the first dose. If that happens, just change it to taking it in the evening time, and that would help reduce that nausea, because you're not putting any food in your stomach during that time, and allowing the your own mechanisms to work while you're sleeping, so that when you wake up in the morning, when you have your first meal, you don't have all that backup of other food that hasn't been digested yet.
At our clinic, we like using layered protocols. So sure, some people are just on GLP-1s. That's great. Again, everybody's individualized. But I want people to understand and to know that there are other things that we can layer in with these GLP-1s to attack different issues and to help with certain things on the wellness journey. Everything from BHRT or testosterone replacement therapy for guys, or adding other specific peptides like AOD 9604, or you could get into like the HGH frag 176 to 191. And, it is a fragment of human growth hormone, which is known as an anabolic compound, but this specific fragment is targeted for weight loss. But the cool part about this fragment is not only does it attack the weight loss, it also allows you to preserve muscle mass. So you're keeping that metabolic rate where it should be, and you're not dropping that as you lose weight. So super important to think about and to take into consideration when you're thinking about some of these protocols for your wellness journey. Now, I really want to get into one more thing, and just from a high level, let's leave the listener here with, what do people need to understand to maximize that GLP-1 therapy success? So I know we've kind of touched on a lot of this stuff in this recording, but I really want to leave them with one kind of comprehensive little tidbit of what should they be doing. So I know that we've talked about the slow titration. That is huge, and that is critical, because ultimately, if you go too fast and you feel like crap, are you going to want to continue the therapy? Probably not, right? So let's get into some other things that you would add to that for what really are the things that we see in the clinic that really maximize that level of success for these individuals going through the GLP-1 therapy.
Definitely the 12-hour fasting. I mean, that is so critical. Also, sleep, stress management, meditation. And I always like to do thyroid. I like to do free T4 and TSH. Most people just do TSHs or calculated T4. But so a lot of people have problems with their thyroid. They can be like the low end of normal, and sometimes just giving them just a low dose of thyroid medication makes a huge difference, because it is a major energy burner, metabolizer, stabilizer. And if you happen to be at that low normal, I mean, what is normal, right? I mean, as is our problem in society, you know how they calculated a normal temperature? They took 100 doctors and took their temperature and they averaged it. And 98.6 was the average. Now, there are some people that are normally low and some people are a little bit higher. But are they abnormal? No, it's what's normal for them. So if you are having symptoms of fatigue and tiredness and your metabolism is low and your free T4 is, a couple points in the normal range, but it's like a big range there, I think they benefit from a low dose of thyroid. A low dose is not going to throw them into hyperthyroidism, but it might be just enough to help them correct some metabolic underlying problem that's occurring that hasn't been treated. So we always like to check free T4s on people to make sure that they don't have any of those kind of issues. So, and there are also subtle physical signs of low thyroid that's not being addressed, and it's hard to do that on a Zoom call. So sometimes actually an encounter, but a lot of doctors aren't aware what those small signs are. So, but that also can help confirm that they definitely need to be on thyroid medications.
One more piece. I know I keep saying one more piece, but this truly is the last one. So not everyone is a good fit for GLP-1 therapy, right? This is not a blanket therapy that everyone should just magically think, oh God, this is for me, right? So knowing that not every medication is made for every single person on earth, how do you identify the patients that the GLP-1 therapy is not necessarily a good fit for them? And, is this boiling down to personality traits, lab work, which lab work is going to be one piece as well, obviously. But, what other histories or what other things make you more cautious when it comes to GLP-1?
I think the pancreatitis is always an issue of concern. And, sometimes these multiple endocrine cancers that sometimes they talk about that I've never seen in my 35 years of practice, but, they put this caution out, But I think that the pancreatitis is probably one of the bigger issues because, sometimes this nausea that people are having could be low-grade pancreatitis. And so if it is persistent despite doing those things, I usually would like to get an amylase and a lipase on them. And if those are elevated, we'll have to stop the medication because they are having low levels of pancreatitis. They don't necessarily have the typical severe pain, but it can be that persistent nausea that maybe that test might be helpful to make sure we're not dealing with that problem. But there was always concern in the past of vascular things, but with these new studies out showing actually benefits with people with strokes and kidney problems and heart attack reduction, that I think those kind of issues have kind of gone to the wayside. There was some concern of maybe creating blindness on it. There was one study, but are we dealing with a diabetic that has retinopathy to begin with? I mean, it's just that, just having a stray outliner of something, we could see that with salt. Hey, you took salt and you got a stroke, therefore that was why you had it. Well, there's a whole lot of other things involved with that as well. So I think that the pancreas is probably the biggest concern that we have. Have you had any other issues that you've encountered, John, with people suggesting problems that they were having?
I mean, I think a huge one that, we haven't really mentioned yet is the personality traits, right? So ultimately, if you think magically, if you have a higher dose, it's going to be more effective. I mean, if you have that kind of addictive personality and that's just how you're wired, I mean, that could be kind of a big red flag. Or, we definitely need to be more intentional with how we're dosing that kind of patient. And we really need to get that through sometimes their thick skull, right? That more is not always better. And, you really want to be intentional here because this is your body. This is your vessel. You only get one, right? So ultimately you want to take care of that. And you don't want to do things that are going to cause undue stress or undue harm, especially in the long term. You got to really be thinking the long game here. Just because something helps you potentially lose more weight in the next month or 2 months or 3 months, what happens in 10 years, right? So we need to take that into account.
Well, I always talk to him about what my sister did. She loved cinnamon, and so she had made an apple pie, and normally you put like a teaspoon of cinnamon, and she put like a half a cup. and it was totally black, and it was like awful, and we threw it away. So more is not necessarily better. Our body has a certain range of what is effective and what is harmful or ineffective. And in that range, we call it therapeutic window, is where we get optimal results. And I don't have a problem with addictive personalities, because I'm an addicted specialist. I deal with it all the time. But it's just a matter of explaining and allowing them to be heard, but then allowing them to understand that our goals are for you to be better, and not just a moment, but lifetime better. And when we can continue to emphasize that, it allows all of us to be on the same path. I call that we're all moving in the same direction. And when we are in that, we get the greatest results.
Definitely. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in. This was kind of a long one. If you guys have more questions and you'd like to reach out to us, our phone number is 812-296-6499. We'll also put the link into the show notes so that you guys can visit our website and reach out through email or explore what all we have to offer. But we're here for you, and stay healthy, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
So you just listened to this episode. Now, join us in being addicted to betterment. Please subscribe to the show, share with your friends, tag us, and please take a moment, leave a review. Yeah, we do want your stars, but we really want the feedback.